A low, pulsing hum. Rain streaks across a runway under pre-dawn haze. Two engines roar to full thrust. Lights shimmer on the tarmac. Until suddenly, everything stops. At precisely 9:11 a.m., Air India Flight 171 begins its climb. Seconds later, both engines die. No distress call, no warning. Only the echo of a single alarm, and then silence. 3 seconds. That's all it took for a routine takeoff to become an irreversible freefall. But what could cause both engines, independent systems, to fail at the exact same moment? When investigators finally decoded the black box, they found something no one expected. Both fuel control switches, the levers that keep the engines alive, had been moved to cutoff, manually, within seconds of liftoff. Yet there was no call-out, no cockpit discussion, no sign that anyone meant to do it. So who moved the switches? Was it a mechanical fault, or human hands acting in confusion? And why, after years of speculation, did the final report only now confirm what truly happened in those final seconds? It was an ordinary morning on the west coast of India. Visibility, moderate. Temperature, 27 degrees Celsius. Winds, calm. On paper, nothing unusual. But inside the cockpit of Flight 171, small, almost imperceptible details were beginning to diverge from normal. 8:59 a.m., pre-flight checks complete. 9:07, cleared for takeoff, runway 27. 9:08:14, rotation. 9:08:17, dual engine flameout detected. The aircraft, an advanced twin-engine jet designed to handle nearly every foreseeable emergency, never made it past 400 feet. In those 20 seconds of flight, nothing outwardly visible suggested disaster. No explosion, no structural failure, just a loss of power, simultaneous, complete, and silent. The engines had performed flawlessly during taxi. Fuel pressure, normal. Thrust response, stable. Checklists, confirmed. But seconds after takeoff, the digital record shows something human. Two levers moved down. Left engine fuel cutoff, right engine fuel cutoff, 3 seconds apart, almost symmetrical. Both engines starved of fuel at the very instant when thrust was needed most. In the cockpit voice recording, there's no shout, no curse, no warning. Just the ambient rush of air. And then a sharp impact. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing the aircraft lift, bank slightly left, and then descend nose-low into an open area just beyond the airport perimeter. No fireball, no explosion, only a column of dust. From liftoff to impact, less than 23 seconds. A perfectly serviceable jet, gone before it even left airport airspace. Air traffic control attempted contact. No reply. The radar trace blinked once, then vanished. When emergency crews reached the site, what they found defied logic. Engines intact, no evidence of foreign object ingestion or fire. Flight controls functional, but both fuel control switches locked in cutoff. The question haunted the investigation. Why would trained pilots deactivate both engines at the same time? Was it mechanical, accidental, or a cognitive breakdown in the cockpit's human-machine interface? Inside the wreckage, investigators recovered the black boxes, charred but intact. They held the answers, and deeper mysteries no one expected. Next, we'll step into the system itself, how modern jet engines communicate, how a simple lever movement translates into thrust or catastrophe, and why investigators say the design of that interface may have silently conspired against the crew. To understand what happened aboard Flight 171, we have to understand this. Two slender levers, the fuel control switches, each one no bigger than a hand, each one capable of killing an engine in an instant. Every jet engine is fed by a precisely regulated stream of fuel, controlled through a mechanical gate. Move the switch to run, and the engine breathes. Move it to cutoff, and that breath stops, immediately. When the switch is toggled to run, the fuel control unit meters kerosene to the combustion chamber, sustaining ignition. At cutoff, that flow is severed. It's the equivalent of pulling the plug on a heart mid-beat. Under normal conditions, these switches are touched only twice per flight. Once before engine start, once at complete shutdown. They sit slightly aft of the thrust levers to prevent accidental contact. But inside Flight 171's cockpit, the data shows both switches moved to cutoff within 3 seconds of rotation, while the aircraft was still climbing. That's the sound of both engines dying, symmetrically. The aircraft's power plants didn't explode or seize. They simply stopped breathing. At 9:08:14, rotation begins. Nose lifts, positive climb established. At 9:08:17, left engine fuel flow drops to 0. Right behind it, the right engine follows suit. RPM decays. Thrust vanishes. All within 3 seconds. A dual-engine flameout right after takeoff is one of aviation's rarest failures. It can happen from bird strikes, fuel contamination, or catastrophic control loss. But in this case, none of those fit. The report confirmed there were no birds, no debris, and no mechanical malfunction. So the question wasn't what failed, but who, or what, commanded the shutdown. During takeoff, the captain's right hand typically rests on the thrust levers, guiding the aircraft's acceleration. The fuel control switches sit directly behind them. In turbulence, fatigue, or distraction, it's conceivable a hand slips backward. But here's the problem. These switches require intentional movement, a deliberate lift and pull. You can't just brush them by mistake. Investigators replayed those seconds frame by frame, aligning throttle position, hand motion, and cockpit vibration. No corresponding verbal cue, no procedural call-out, no confirmed cutoff. Just 2 silent actions, milliseconds apart. It's as if the aircraft obeyed a phantom command, a human action with no human awareness. This led investigators into a far more complicated question. Could the cockpit's own design have contributed to this? Could an interface, built to prevent mistakes, have actually enabled one? Modern flight decks are marvels of integration, hundreds of inputs condensed into ergonomic arrays. But that elegance hides a danger when familiarity turns into complacency. When identical motions trigger very different consequences. In earlier aircraft versions, the fuel control switches sat farther aft, separated by guard flaps. But in this model, they were repositioned closer to the thrust levers for efficiency. That small design choice, 3 inches, may have erased the tactile distinction between powering up and shutting down. A fraction of a second, a fraction of an inch, and a fully functional aircraft is doomed. The official report calls it a possible confusion or surprise over the change. A phrase that conceals an uncomfortable truth. The system did exactly what it was told, but not what anyone intended. Next, we turn from the levers and data to the people behind them. 2 pilots, 1 routine morning, and a decision, or reaction, that may never have been conscious. For investigators, data can explain how, but only voices reveal who and why. Inside the charred cockpit voice recorder of Flight 171, those voices still exist. Faint, fragmented, but unmistakably human. The captain, a veteran with thousands of hours of flight time. The first officer, methodical, steady, cross-checking instruments in rhythm. Both experienced, both qualified, neither showing the slightest hint of what was about to unfold. Set thrust. Thrust set. Those are the final standard callouts recorded. From that point forward, the flight becomes wordless. Training teaches instinct, checklist, callout confirmation. But under stress, in turbulence, fatigue, or distraction, human perception narrows. It's called cognitive tunneling. The brain locks onto one familiar pattern while ignoring others. If the pilot's muscle memory expected a certain motion, a lift, a slide, a push, it could perform it without conscious verification. Investigators ran dozens of simulations. They found that in some configurations, a pilot's palm could brush both cutoff guards if their wrist pivoted mid-rotation. But even so, the switches required a lift motion, meaning someone physically pulled them. So, was it accidental, or a reflex under disorientation? The report remains silent on motive, only noting no verbal indication of intent. Aviation psychologists describe this as automation shock. When a system's feedback doesn't match expectation, humans hesitate. Milliseconds of disbelief can freeze action. In Flight 171, those milliseconds were fatal. Imagine being there. The nose lifts. The sound of engines you've heard 1,000 times suddenly dies. The horizon wavers. The alarms begin. You have 2 seconds to diagnose the impossible, and no altitude left to try. In those seconds, the crew likely reached instinctively for power, but the engines no longer listened. The switches behind them had already sealed their fate. There's no villain here, no negligence, just human beings, inside a labyrinth of systems that obey absolutely. The report's final wording puts it plainly: possible confusion or surprise over the change. A sterile phrase that conceals a tragedy of reflexes, interfaces, and seconds. Yet even now, one question lingers in the data logs. If neither pilot acknowledged the switch movement, could there be another explanation? Was there a design quirk, an electrical fault, that triggered a false input? Or could cockpit ergonomics, long taken for granted, be the real culprit? The truth, investigators realized, might not lie with the crew at all, but with the architecture surrounding them. The cockpit as both partner and trap. And that leads us into the next chapter: the evidence. The reanalysis of the black box, and the single new finding that redefined this case forever. When the engines of Flight 171 went silent, 3 explanations emerged, each one plausible, each one terrifying in its own way. Theory 1: mechanical fault. Could this have been a mechanical malfunction, a hidden flaw deep within the fuel system itself? The first teams on site thought so. After all, dual-engine flameout is a textbook symptom of fuel contamination or pump failure. Investigators examined the fuel lines. No blockages, no water, no ice, no microbial residue. Fuel purity, 99.9%. Both fuel pumps tested, serviceable. Valves, operational. Even electrical continuity checks came back clean. The aircraft was healthy. The engines were healthy. There was no technical reason for them to die simultaneously. So, if not the machines, then the humans? Theory 2: human error. Investigators next turned to pilot error. Could the crew have accidentally shut off the fuel supply during rotation? The data seemed to point that way. Both fuel control switches moved manually to cut off within seconds. But here's the paradox. To move those switches, you must lift them upward past a guard, then pull down. 2 deliberate motions. Not a slip, not a brush. Was it disorientation? A misinterpreted procedure? An attempt to correct something else? Throttle instability, engine surge, that instead triggered shutdown? In older cockpit models, the thrust levers and cutoff switches were separated by distance and shape. But in this aircraft, efficiency redesign had brought them closer. Close enough that under stress, under vibration, the difference could blur. The report uses those exact words. But the phrase conceals something deeper, a truth investigators hesitate to name. That human error was made possible by design. Theory 3: design flaw. If the pilots didn't mean to move the switches, and the switches didn't fail on their own, what remains is the space between, the human-machine interface. The ergonomics study conducted after the crash revealed a troubling oversight. In certain wrist angles, a pilot applying forward thrust could inadvertently contact the cutoff guard while stabilizing the throttle. A design intended for efficiency became a hazard in motion. 3 centimeters. That's the margin between flight and flameout. Even more disturbing, this wasn't the first time such proximity caused confusion. Archived maintenance bulletins hinted at previous cockpit reports of switch misidentification during takeoff checks. Minor incidents, never fatal. Until now. For investigators, the pattern was undeniable. The system didn't just fail after takeoff. It may have set the crew up to fail before it. Theory 4: unofficial, something else entirely. But even as the final report leaned toward cockpit confusion, some analysts saw another layer. They noticed subtle asynchrony in the switch movement timings, a 0.6-second lag between left and right engines. Too precise to be random, too symmetrical to be chaos. Could this have been a feedback loop? A system echo misinterpreting one input as 2? or something electrical. Investigators tested every circuit, every relay. No evidence of fault. Yet they couldn't rule out a transient spike, a signal ghost too brief to record. If that's true, then Flight 171 may have been undone by a microsecond glitch, an invisible, one-in-a-billion anomaly in a system designed never to fail. And so, the theories converge on a tragic truth shared by every modern cockpit. That safety depends not on systems alone, nor on humans alone, but on the fragile conversation between them. The final report would call it a probable human-machine interaction failure. But for those who lost someone aboard, that phrase feels hollow. They wanted to know why it took this long, and what changed because of it. Those answers began to surface only years later, in the reanalysis of black box data, and a startling discovery hidden in the voltage trace of a single circuit. Next, the evidence reopens, and one overlooked signal, just milliseconds long, reframes everything we thought we knew. When the official case had cooled, a quiet team of analysts reopened the data. Not out of conspiracy, but out of curiosity. Something in the flight record never added up. According to the primary report, both engine fuel control switches were manually moved to cutoff within 3 seconds of rotation. But one specialist noticed a discrepancy, a fraction of a second between the digital timestamps and the physical lever sensors. 6 milliseconds. Too short for human reflex, too long for electrical simultaneity. A ghost in the circuit. When they zoomed in, they found something else. The signal that commanded both engines to shut down didn't originate from the cockpit switches alone. It was echoed, duplicated, by a secondary data bus. In aviation systems, redundancy is safety. Channel A mirrors Channel B, so no single fault can bring an aircraft down. But here, both channels triggered the same command, milliseconds apart, as if one had copied the other. The reanalysis team simulated dozens of fault paths. Every scenario: pilot input, short circuit, cross-feed interference. Only one produced the exact signature recorded on Flight 171's black box. A momentary voltage bridge between two data lines. A static pulse, invisible, brief. Enough to fool the aircraft's brain into thinking it had received a shutdown command from both switches. If true, this means neither pilot touched the fuel controls. The engines obeyed a phantom command that originated not from human error, but from an electrical hiccup smaller than a heartbeat. But here's the problem. The glitch could not be replicated. Not in the simulator, not in the lab. The component was destroyed in the crash. The physical evidence gone. So while the theory fits the data perfectly, it remains just that, a theory. Unprovable. Unrepeatable. And yet, hauntingly plausible. The final report update didn't rewrite history, but it quietly added one sentence. An electrical anomaly cannot be ruled out. For the families, that line reopened old wounds. For engineers, it opened a new frontier, a reminder that even the most advanced safety systems remain vulnerable to the smallest imperfection. In the years that followed, multiple manufacturers revised their circuitry insulation standards. Flight control units were redesigned, switch placement protocols reviewed. Every lesson written in the loss of Flight 171 was quietly engineered into the next generation of aircraft. But the reanalysis left one lingering question, one that still divides investigators today. If a millisecond glitch could shut down both engines on takeoff, how many near misses have gone unnoticed? Because not every anomaly ends in disaster. Some never make it past a warning light. Some never get reported at all. The data simply resets, and the world keeps flying, unaware of how close it came. Flight 171 was the one that didn't reset. It carried the proof, buried in 6 milliseconds of corrupted voltage, that perfection is an illusion, and safety is a fragile conversation between metal and mind. Next, we step back from the lab and look at the human cost, the public reckoning, and the unspoken truth buried in those final pages of the report. Because once the report was released, it didn't just reveal the truth. It revealed what the truth cost. 6 milliseconds of electrical noise. That's all it took to decide the fate of 171 souls. In the years since, Every wire, every switch, every line of code has been examined. But data alone can't measure loss. It can't record the sound of waiting families, or the silence that follows an official explanation. For engineers, the report brought closure, a technical answer to a technical question. For families, it reopened a wound. Because when a cause is labeled anomaly, there's no one to blame, no face, no closure, only the echo of what could never be proven. Flight 171 became more than a crash report. It became a mirror, reflecting the limits of human control in a world run by systems that listen faster than we think. And as the final report was released to the public, one uncomfortable question began to surface. If a machine can fail without warning, and if humans can't stop what they don't understand, then who, or what, is truly in command? The truth was out, but truth always carries a cost. The official report is now complete. Its pages are filled with data, acronyms, and timestamps. But between the lines lies something no chart can hold: the cost of understanding. After years of speculation, the conclusion was clinical: a probable human-machine interaction failure. No conspiracy, no cover-up, just a chain of seconds, systems, and silence. For the families, the release brought no peace. How do you grieve when the cause is a glitch? How do you forgive something that had no mind, no motive, only code? In a world built on automation, we place our faith in systems that rarely fail. But every button, every lever, every algorithm still traces back to a human hand, a designer, a programmer, a pilot trying to make sense of 100 signals at once. Flight 171 forced aviation to look inward. It exposed how safety itself depends on a fragile equilibrium. Human intuition on one side, machine obedience on the other. When that balance falters, even by milliseconds, everything built upon it begins to tremble. After the investigation, design standards quietly changed. Wiring insulation upgraded, switch guards reinforced, simulators recalibrated to train pilots for dual-engine flameout recognition, small corrections born from unbearable loss. But not all lessons are mechanical. Some exist only in silence, in what was said too late, and what was never recorded at all. Every generation of engineers believes they've built the uncrashable plane. Every tragedy reminds us, perfection is temporary. It lasts only until the next anomaly. Flight 171 was not the first mystery written in static, and it won't be the last. Because every time a cockpit powers up, the ancient conversation begins again. Between human instinct and machine precision, between certainty and chaos. And maybe that's the truth the final report couldn't print, that we'll never eliminate risk. We can only understand it faster. They finally released the Air India 171 report, but what it really released was a question. When the next anomaly appears, will we recognize it in time? If you believe some mysteries still deserve to be understood, stay with us. We'll keep searching, in the data, in the dark, in the spaces between certainty and silence.